It was a typical autumn evening when the Forrester family moved into their new home in the quaint suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek. Nestled amidst a canopy of towering trees, the house appeared welcoming, its red brick facade exuding an air of warmth. Little did they know, however, that their new abode would soon become a portal to a nightmare they could never have imagined. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the street, the Forrester's youngest daughter, Emily, couldn't shake the feeling of unease settling in her stomach. Something about the neighboring house, an aging Victorian mansion with peeling paint and windows like vacant eyes, sent shivers down her spine. "Mom, Dad," she whispered, tugging at her parents' sleeves, "you think the neighbors are nice?" Mr. and Mrs. Forrester exchanged a glance before offering reassuring smiles. "Of course, sweetheart," Mrs. Forrester replied, ruffling Emily's hair. Neighbors are always friendly, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her like a second skin. As days turned into weeks, the Forrester family settled into their new routine. Mr. Forrester commuted to the city for work, while Mrs. Forrester busied herself with unpacking boxes and decorating their new home. Emily and her older brother, Jacob, attended the local school, where they made friends and immersed themselves in their studies. However, despite their efforts to acclimate to their new surroundings, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she glanced out of her bedroom window, she felt the weight of someone's gaze boring into her, sending a chill down her spine. One chilly evening, as the wind whispered secrets through the trees and the moon cast long, twisted shadows across the lawn, Emily decided to investigate the neighboring house. With trembling hands and a racing heart, she crept across the yard, her footsteps muffled by the thick blanket of fallen leaves. The closer she got to the Victorian mansion, the more her apprehension grew. The windows were dark, devoid of life, and the air around the house seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. Summoning all her courage, Emily approached the front door, her hand trembling as she reached out to knock. Before her knuckles could make contact, however, the door creaked open of its own accord, revealing a dimly lit interior shrouded in shadows. Heart pounding in her chest, Emily stepped over the threshold, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the sight before her. The walls were lined with shelves upon shelves of glass jars, each containing a grotesque assortment of preserved creatures, spiders, snakes, and other, more sinister specimens. A chill swept through the room, causing Emily to shiver as she backed away from the macabre display. But before she could flee, a voice spoke from the darkness, sending ice coursing through her veins. "Ah, Emily Forrester," it whispered, low and menacing. "I've been expecting you." With a strangled cry, Emily turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with a resounding thud, trapping her inside. Panic clawed at her chest as she pounded on the door, desperate to escape the nightmarish trap. But as she turned back to face the room, her blood ran cold. Standing before her, bathed in the sickly glow of moonlight filtering through the windows, was her neighbor, a gaunt figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. "I've been watching you, Emily," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "And now you're mine." With a guttural scream, Emily lashed out, her fists connecting with empty air as the figure vanished before her eyes. Trembling with fear, she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks as she prayed for rescue. Meanwhile, back at the Forrester home, Jacob paced the living room, his brow furrowed with worry. Emily had been gone for hours, and despite his efforts to find her, there was no sign of her anywhere. Just as he was about to call the police, a bone-chilling scream echoed through the night, causing his blood to run cold. Without hesitation, he dashed across the lawn, his heart pounding in his chest as he reached the neighboring house. The front door stood ajar, swinging on its hinges as if inviting him inside. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Jacob stepped over the threshold, his eyes widening in horror at the sight before him. There, in the dimly lit interior, lay Emily, pale and trembling on the floor, her eyes wide with terror, as she whispered of the horrors she had witnessed. But as Jacob reached out to comfort her, a voice spoke from the darkness, freezing him in his tracks. "Welcome, Jacob Forrester," it whispered, sending a shiver down his spine. "You're just in time for the show." With a sickening lurch, Jacob realized the truth. They were not alone in the house. and whatever lurked in the shadows was hungry for more than just their fear. As the night wore on and the darkness closed in around them, the Forrester siblings found themselves locked in a battle for survival against an ancient evil that lurked within the walls of their new home. With each passing moment, the true horror of their situation became clearer. The realization dawned that their neighbor's house was not just a dwelling, but a gateway to a realm of nightmares. And as the last embers of hope flickered and died, the Forrester family knew that they would never escape the clutches of the house next door. For in the world of true neighbor horror stories, some nightmares are all too real, and once you enter, there is no going back.